Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of the Daily Fantasy Digest podcast, the all-inclusive podcast where we talk all things daily fantasy sports to give you an edge over the competition. I'm your host, Joe Bewer, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, owner and or doer of the Between the Lines podcast for Draftkings. I have Eric Rosenthal joining me today. Eric, how's it going?
It's going really well. Great actual intro. That little owner doer. It's pretty accurate because it's like a little bit of both. It is a DraftKings podcast, but you described it weirdly in a perfect way.
So, how would you say that you got into daily fantasy sports? Before I go in and talk about the podcast that you run, I'm kind of curious on how you actually got into the realm of daily fantasy sports.
Man, I cannot even believe what daily fantasy sports is right now versus when I got into it. When I first started, we're talking probably, 2008, 2007. It was a struggle to get. There was no $5 games that didn't exist. Head-to-head $5 games did not exist yet. It was head-to-head $1 games, and I would play a bunch of people or try to get like $24 of games in that night. That's how it worked. And
so you're an OG.
An OG, and it is freaking mind-blowing to see people winning $1 million in a day when it was like there's literally playing $1 head-to-heads.
Yeah, because it didn't used to be that way. It used to be like max. I mean, maybe back in the day, what, 50, $100?
Dude, I remember when they introduced $5 head-to-heads, and it was crazy. When they introduced 5-player $1 games and 5-player $5 games, that was like the whole conversation for the day with me and my other friend who played. It was like an all-day conversation. We couldn't believe it. This is life-changing that exists. It's just insanity.
So I know that you currently run the podcast over for DraftKings. How much time do you really have devoted to actually still playing, or have you sort of transitioned out of playing in total to kind of just focus on the podcast?
Definitely not transitioned because of the podcast, but I am playing daily fantasy sports less. One, because there's less of an edge, and it doesn't mean there's still not a huge edge to be had all the time. It's just you need a lot more time to get that edge. So back in the day, not even that far back, but I remember one game where I'm following every beat reporter on Twitter, sending the messages, replying. I found out like Chris Bosh wasn't going to play some game, and somehow nobody else knew because he just tweeted it to me at I'm making up the time, so let's just say 3:57 Pacific. I got him out of all my lineups. Nobody knew. There was no aggregators putting out Chris Bosh's out. Everyone's saying it. Nobody else tweeted it. He just sent it in a private message to me. And I know Chris Bosh is out. Nobody else knows. Clean up just thousands of dollars that day in winnings because that's the kind of edge you could get back then. And it's not that now. You have to put in crazy amount of research or pay someone who does that research every day to win. It's not not so simple anymore. So
it's kind of crazy though, isn't it? I mean, a lot of things now, especially with daily fantasy, can literally be done for you. Like DraftKings, the DK Live, the guys over there do an incredible job. Like they do an incredible job, especially for MLB. They'll put out 4 or 5 articles. You could literally create a lineup that could potentially win thousands of dollars just off of what they write. Now, another thing that it kind of, for me, like, not to hit them or anything like that, but for me, yeah, I'll use those because I am an avid player, but it's kind of with the amount of electronic generating of lineups and how much edge there isn't to be had anymore. It's you can those man-made, handmade lineups are not even a thing anymore.
Yeah, I still believe in them in some ways, but there is a very big computer algorithm element to it that isn't discussed nearly enough, especially from the top players.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of times when I'm recommending plays, for instance, I'll talk about it in a way that it is normal and talking about, okay, this guy's hitting third, he's got this, whatever, but it is a computer algorithm play. He popped up in my computer algorithm. That's why I like him. And then I do my little research into him and I talk about him hitting third and his opportunities today in the over-under. I don't dive into all the data that's behind why my, projection system propped him up so high. And I think it's the same case with a lot of the guys, DKLI, for instance.
So gut feelings are out the window now.
Pretty much. I mean, there's gut feelings still. There is narrative still, like Cody Bellinger on his birthday.
Right. Or Vlad Guerrero's debut, the whole 9 yards where you just play him just because you feel like you have to. And if you don't, you'll feel dumb if he goes off.
There's some of that still exists, but the edge traditionally isn't there anymore. Like that's not how you find an edge.
Would you agree or disagree that a lot of the computer generation happens in the realm of MLB and NBA DFS?
I would agree with that statement. Yeah,
because I feel like those games are more predictable than an NFL game. And I feel like in football, there is still a decent amount of edge to be had. You don't generally see players, especially in cash games for NFL, owned more than maybe 40% max. But if you're in MLB, I mean, if we're talking on any night that like Justin Verlander's pitching in any cash game, he's 80% owned minimum.
Yeah, and also I think coach speak and decision making plays obviously a way bigger importance in football, because it doesn't matter like if the manager is like, we're really gonna try to get the ball into Mike Trout's hands tonight. It's like he's gonna get his 4 at bats, and if they intentionally walk him one of those times, hit him with the pitch another, and there's nothing you can do. You
Right.
can't feed him the ball. There's no edge to be had. Like Mike Trout is as good as he is. He's gonna get 4 or 5 at bats against the pitcher he's gonna face, and that's what it is. In the NFL, it's a lot more about game script. It's about coaching decisions. It's about what you think is gonna happen. There's a million other things that we can get into that I won't right now, but baseball is how it is, and there's projection systems for a reason, but it can kind of be solved in a way, which in football it can't be solved, because it doesn't matter what a guy's 40 time is or how many carries he deserves. If the coach saw the backup player fumble in practice and got really pissed off at him, and he's going to give the starter 5 extra more carries in the game.
And that could be a touchdown, if anything.
That could be a touchdown. That could be just the difference between winning or losing. And it's unlike baseball, especially, where it can't happen. I mean, obviously, if they bench Trout, the lineup changes, but other than that,
but I mean, if they bench Trout, all that does is just open up value for you to get somebody like Christian Yelich and like Cody Bellinger, because now you have all this cheap value,
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like a totally different world, more based on numbers than attitudes and, random coaching decisions that these guys make.
Yeah, I definitely say that the NFL is definitely probably the best DFS sport to play. Just speaking from personal opinion, but for sake of baseball, are you a cash game or GPP player currently right now, given how much you actually play MLB DFS?
Cash. GPPs have become very, very difficult. The computer algorithming, if that's even a word, of GPPs has won. It does win, and I think I'm smart enough to understand that other people have better GPP algorithms than I do. And at a certain point, it's my computer going against their computer. They've put more time, effort, and energy into their computer. Silly to try to compete with it.
Yeah, I mean, cash games, it's like, I mean, the narrative for cash games is you'll have 4 guys 70% owned, and then your rest of your lineup is the reason you win, and that's random for everybody.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate. It's a different day and age than it's literally like, it wasn't that long ago where like people didn't just stack 8 hitters all the time to try to win GPPs. Like people just didn't do that, and like it just made you win like all the time. And people are a lot smarter nowadays.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I'm definitely staying away from GPPs and trying not to throw my money into the fire. But one thing I do want to transition to, I don't want to get into too much strategy talk, since you are primarily not an MLB DFS player per se. Like it's not what you would normally play. I do want to.
I'll interrupt you.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I can. When I say like I'm not playing as much, it's still at like a Madison Center area. It's still like at a pro level. Like me not playing as much is like, okay, I'm not going to play $2,500 in MLB tonight because I not that focused into it, but I'm still going to play more than probably 95% of people out there. Obviously, not more than these. Some pros are putting up 100 grand in a night.
Right,
But
but I mean, I've in the past on this. I'm not sure if you've listened to the prior podcast. I know we just touched base today, but I've had a few people on here, like writers, that give their sort of strategy, and I feel like everybody attacks these cash game slates the same way. You pick your SP1, you pick your SP2, you for cash, you pick your 2 to 3 man stack, and you fill in from there. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on that, or if you have any other insight, I'd be interested.
I look for projected ownership as like the first thing I do, really. And then I decide if I'm going to go with or against that projected ownership for the day. Rest of that is relatively accurate. I mean, obviously everyone has their different perspectives, but I think we're probably best moving on, like you recommended at the beginning, than getting into the weeds.
Yeah. One thing I do, and I'm very interested about, is the podcast that you run over there on DraftKings and what that's centered around.
Yeah, so it's a gambling focused podcast called Between the Lines because we go between all the betting lines throughout the day and the futures. I mean, we'll analyze everything from who's going to win the NBA Finals or the Masters to over under points for Kyle Lowry tonight. Literally any bet you can think of, who's going to be second pick in the NBA draft. Like, we analyze that, go through the odds, give recommendations on who who you should or shouldn't bet on, and have been pretty darn successful, I'd say, since the podcast started.
So you're pretty much unrelated to DFS on this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we'll mention daily fantasy because it is DraftKings. There is a correlation between like player props, especially, and daily fantasy. Like if you're playing a guy who costs like 10,000 in daily fantasy and you're playing him, you're probably betting he's going to go over his like point total, for example. So
right.
There is a big correlation, and it's not necessarily DFS oriented, but yeah, we'll mention, hey, I'm making it up, but Westbrook's 10K on DraftKings tonight. His over-unders X amount of points. If you're playing him on DK, you obviously think he's going over this amount of points or over this rebounds, etc.
Right. So how long have you been doing this specific podcast for DraftKings?
I think we're only like 12 episodes into the DraftKings podcast.
Oh, so it's fairly new.
And it's fairly new. I've done other podcasts in the past that I had, but this one's relatively new.
Nice. So I know prior to this you mentioned that you were pretty non-existent in the NBA DFS world. Is that accurate?
Right now, at the moment, because it's playoffs. There's just not the volume that there is in a regular season.
Oh, so you won't throw a GPP lineup in a 2-game slate, nothing like that?
It's like I will, but there's only so many hours in the day. I got a million things going on. Like tonight, I'm not. There's no GPP lineup for me at all. Actually, you know what? Maybe no, I don't have time. I was gonna say maybe since there's time, I'll go do some research, but I'm gonna skip it.
Yeah. So are you? Do you run this podcast alone, or do you have some other guys that kind of chip in on that?
So it's a DraftKings podcast, but every episode is Will Appleby. You might know him from accounts such as Not Sports Center, Jeopardy Sports on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, anything like that. I'm 90% sure anyone listening has at least seen his stuff if they don't know who he is, because it just gets retweeted so often, things like that. And Gary and Thorne, who works for DraftKings. You'll see him on DK Live stuff, and his articles every day for DraftKings.
And right now, you're just centered on NBA playoffs, or do you kind of throw in some MLB stuff, player props in that regards?
MLB player props, NBA draft, NFL draft, Masters. If competitive eating comes up, and I think there's an advantage on how many hot dogs Kobayashi's going to eat or something, Joey Chestnut, I will mention that too.
So you're would you say that you're more of a straight better than an actual DFS player? Like you'll push bets out every day?
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate right now. I mean, it switches. Like a big part of that is just some of the lost easiness and edge in daily fantasy that I have to regain starting this upcoming NFL season probably.
Yeah, no kidding. So I've been getting some requests for some sort of predictions, and I think this would be the best episode for me to kind of debut these sort of predictions. As far as a few predictions, first off, who do you think has the best shot at winning the NBA Finals and why?
the Golden State Warriors because they are maybe the best collection of talent that's ever happened in the history of the NBA.
And who do you think poses the biggest threat?
The Houston Rockets for sure because they've broken the math game. Whether they win or lose this series doesn't, in my opinion, prove the Rockets are better or worse than the Warriors. They realize that it's a math game in the end. If you shoot 45 or 50 or 63 pointers and an abnormally high percentage of them go in, you'll beat anybody ever. It doesn't matter how good they are. If you shoot 50% on 68 threes, like you win. So,
yeah, I did see that the other night that they that's kind of like their play style behind it. Like you can have the best defense or strategy going into a coaching strategy, but if they're just tossing up 83s and they make half, you're going to lose. There's no way around it.
Yeah, and X percentage of the time that's going to happen, and X percentage of the time it's going to happen 4 out of 7 games, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. You can be better than them in every way, but you will lose a certain percentage of the time, and that's the beauty of. It's annoying, but the beauty and the wiseness of how they play basketball when a team like the Warriors is just better than them.
I agree. I definitely agree. See. So my bold prediction, and call me dumb, is that the Milwaukee Bucks have the best shot.
Yeah, I disagree. They did run through the East to a crazy level. I predicted that the Celtics had a very, very, very good chance of beating the Bucks in this series, mainly because of Brad Stevens. Just look what he did at Butler before. Look what he's done with the Celtics, and it's easy to like remember and be like, oh yeah, like Isaiah Thomas was like 5th in the MVP. That's why they won. It's like no. Isaiah Thomas leaves the Celtics, and now he isn't in the rotation for the Nuggets as they try to win an NBA championship. Yep. He didn't play for the Cavs, so when they try to win an NBA championship, nobody wanted him. Like that's who he was working with. Like these are the guys, and I think now that he actually has some talent. He's got a very good shot to lead the Celtics to a win over the Bucks or basically anybody but the Warriors, in my opinion.
So yeah, I definitely do think that the Bucks will win in 6, only because of it's hard. It's hard to stop. It's hard to stop Giannis. It really is. Guy's an absolute monster. Everybody knows that. I think that last game was sort of like they walked. They absolutely walked through the Pistons. So, I mean, if we're being honest, they probably somewhat had some sort of underestimated factor going into the game with the Celtics, and they got absolutely mopped. Like, I'm not going to lie. And I don't know if I can necessarily say that happens again.
Yeah, there's a good chance like they can just come out and whoop the Celtics in game 2, for sure. I mean, they won 60 games for a reason, but the Celtics are now 5-0 in the playoffs. The Bucks ran through the Pistons, but Celtics went 4-0 against the Pacers, who are a better team, even without Oladipo. I mean, the Pistons were missing Blake Griffin, who I think that was even more important because the Pistons have less talent around him. But I think at a certain point, Brad Stevens is just that much better than everybody at coaching individual basketball game, and it makes it tough.
I
come out, but I think it's also a good chance the Celtics just win the series too.
I definitely agree. Now, I mean, it's definitely possible. I'll still hold my own with the Bucks, but the argument is valid. It's definitely there, and I'm not going to disagree with that. The other question that's been highly asked is, do you think the Trailblazers can pose any threat?
How do I put it? Because if Trailblazers have any threat to the Warriors, no. That's how I'll put it.
You think they'll get past the Nuggets?
I'm taking the Nuggets, but I think if the Blazers make the conference finals and they play the Warriors, they are going to get run off the floor so badly it's going to be an actual embarrassment. Because in the end, like I love Damian Lillard, love what he did in that first series.
That was crazy.
His 3-pointer to hit 50 points and walk off, one of the greatest shots in the history of the sport. But I really think the Warriors will run them off the freaking floor, similar to how Drew Holiday and Rajon Rondo did. I think it'll be Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green just embarrassing them. And I guess I'll give them 5 games.
And do you think they meet the Raptors?
The Raptors were my pick to make the NBA Finals out of the East before it started. They're still my pick now because I had so much hesitation picking between the Bucks and Celtics. That was the main reason. I thought the Raptors would take care of the Sixers, and I thought it's pretty 50-50. The Celtics or Bucks go through, and that math puts me picking the Raptors because I'm more confident in them making the conference finals than either of the other teams.
I have a feeling the Raptors will go, but it's a tough one for me. Are you much involved in NFL or not NFL, NHL before I ask for a prediction?
Not really, no.
Okay. And last prediction, I know it's early in the season, winner of the World Series, or most likely to win the World Series, and your gut feeling why?
Well, I think I'm going to be a little biased here. I am a Los Angeles Dodgers fan.
Oh,
I
man.
was there watching them lose in person in the World Series last year. Took my mom to the game, thought they were going to win. How sad. But hey, they're the second biggest favorite. The Dodgers at plus 600. They got the money to spend to plug any holes. I think them, the Astros, the Yankees are all up there at the top as the biggest favorites.
You got no love for my Cubs?
Hey, I think there's some value in getting the Cubs are 3 times less likely to win the World Series according to the sports book.
Yeah,
So,
I mean it's definitely a long shot at this point. But I mean, I'll stay true to my city's home team.
hey, you would love my co-host on the Between the Lines podcast, Will Appleby, a big Chicago Cubs fan. So
I know. I actually sent him a message earlier today. I was hoping to have a conversation with him at some point on this podcast just to see if I could get some of his input. So I know that we kind of touched around DFS and betting and stuff like that. We are running a little short on time here. I know there's some other things going on. If you could, just for everybody listening, give one piece of advice to anybody out there listening that either may be starting or is kind of like amateur player, DFS or just straight betting, what would your number one tip of advice be?
bankroll management. Do not extend yourself further than you can risk for yourself financially, but also just because our confidence levels get too high and people are risking too much money on the events they can't control. You could be completely right, and you can have an edge on who's going to win the NBA Finals or who's going to play great in DFS tonight, but the guy can get thrown out in the first inning or the first quarter or tear his ACL. And too many people are betting too much or risking too much in one day that random, even if you have the most right prediction ever, random fluky can make you lose, and slow and steady wins the race. That doesn't mean if you bet 500 every night to go down to 10, but know your limits and be able to lose every day for a week straight and be able to continue betting your normal amount, because those things are going to happen. Even if you are correct, you make all the right bets, you make all the right picks, you're going to have 7-day stretches where you lose every single time due to bad luck or dumb luck, and you need to be in a position to lose 7 straight days and risk the same amount of money on the 8th day.
Would you say that the risk is more in daily fantasy or straight betting, and why?
That's a good question. I think it's pretty equal, honestly. In the end, you're trying to get a small advantage against the field and play that advantage over and over and over again. And if you do it that way with smart bankroll management, they're pretty equal. You can make money playing daily fantasy, and you can definitely make money betting, especially if you limit your bets to exploitable situations.
I definitely feel like in my past that betting straight has had way more emotional connection than DFS betting, because DFS it's a lot more work to put in. But I mean, anybody can say, hey, the Suns might beat the Rockets this time plus 7,000. If I put $5 on it, I might win $350. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with you, and that's going to happen sometimes. That's what I said before. It's like you can bet that every single game eventually you're going to win, I guess. But it is very different than playing daily fantasy, where you're in much more control.
Well, Eric, I do want to thank you for coming on the podcast. I know that we were cut a little short here. And I do want to thank you for taking your time out of this day to do this interview. I know you're pretty busy with your schedule. Before we go ahead and cut this off, I do want to give a quick shout out on a few things. Before I go ahead and shout out all of Eric's social media, anybody who's listening on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe, like, do whatever you do. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure that you listen and subscribe so you can stay up to tune with all the new episodes we're coming. There'll be an interview and 2 slate breakdowns every week moving forward. Now, as for Eric, you can find Eric on Twitter at Eric Sports. Go ahead and give him a follow. Tweets out some pretty interesting content as far as NBA and betting and stuff like that. And make sure that you go ahead and listen to the Between the Lines podcast hosted by Draftkings. They just started up and they're kind of getting their feet wet in the podcast game with these episodes. So I would appreciate it if you would go ahead and give them a listen. Now, Eric, I do appreciate you coming on the podcast, and hopefully we might have you back on here at some point in the future. All right.
Yeah, it's been a great time. Everyone go give 5 stars and rate this podcast. I hope it was a good one. You've been a great host for me. Tweets are always good. Go do Joe a favor, rate this podcast, review it, share it with a friend, because it's a great host. I had a great time being a guest on it. And I hope you guys appreciate what Joe's doing here, because I've had a fantastic time and I'm excited to come back in the future.
Eric, I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.